get started. Let me just say good evening to everybody. I'm Bruce Ives, here with our senior rabbi, Jeremy Morrison, and my partner in crime, Tina Rosenblum. And we'd love to welcome you to this summertime chat, the first of many opportunities for all of us to get to know Rabbi Morrison a lot better. First off, we hope this evening finds you all safe and healthy. And we're all very glad you made the time to join us. We had such a great response to this invitation, Rabbi Morrison, to get to know you a little bit better, that we had to shift from our normal Zoom format to the streaming format so we wouldn't crash the server, which is always a good problem to have. This is one of many opportunities we're all going to have to get to know Rabbi Morrison better. In fact, I think in the coming days, you will see more information about a series of smaller Zoom gatherings that we're planning over the summer for people to have a chance to meet with you in small groups and really have a conversation. So we'll look forward to that. But in the meantime, why don't we get started and begin this evening's conversation or interrogation, depending on where Tina takes it. And just a reminder for those of you who have friends or family who aren't able to join us tonight, Rachel Tash is recording this session, so you'll be able to replay it from the streaming site. With that, let me turn it over to my partner in crime, Tina Rosenblum.
Great, thanks, Bruce. All right, Rabbi Morrison, we're going to start with what I would consider a couple of softball questions, but these are like the high pitch softball questions. This is not like a roundhouse 85 mile per hour. So, so first, why don't you tell us all where you grew up, maybe a little bit about your parents and siblings, if you have them, and what they do.
Sure, it's great. It's great to be with you both, and thrilled that so many have joined us virtually. And boy, am I eager to be with you in person, but we'll accept this, and we all understand why we're doing things like this. I'm a child from Brookline, Massachusetts. That's where I grew up, which is right next to Boston, a wonderful place to grow up. We were there in great part because my father had a job at the Harvard School of Public Health. He was an epidemiologist, and so that brought us back to Boston. I was born in Boston. I spent a couple of years in DC when my father was at Walter Reed Hospital at the end of the Vietnam War. And then we moved back to Boston. My parents met in Boston at Newton High. I'm a multi-generation Boston family. And so my father was an epidemiologist. He died in 1992, but in the last part of his career, he was at Brown University. My mother, I come from this family of folks interested in scholarship and academics. And my mother has a PhD in English from Brandeis University. And she spent, though, much of her career as a systems analyst in an HMO. First she was a system analyst also at Harvard, but then at an HMO in Boston. I still don't quite know what a system analyst does. And I have one brother. My brother Robert is 2 years older than I, and he's a professor of Islam and Judaism at Bowdoin College in Maine.
Wow, this intellectual streak runs pretty deep in the Morrison family, clearly.
Yeah.
Present company excluded.
I put them on a different level from myself. So, but yeah, and although I didn't know, we might talk more about this as we go. They all, as I think many of you know, I pursued a PhD after I finished rabbinical school. I guess that's what I was destined to do because of the rest of them, but that certainly wasn't on my mind until my late 20s or so. So I'm just trying to catch up with the rest of them.
That's all right. Well, it's a good foot race to be in. That's most impressive. So, okay. So prior to entering the foot race, let's really roll the tape back. You're little Jeremy Morrison, little 6-year-old, well, bigger than that, I'm sure, but 6-year-old Jeremy Morrison, what did you want to do at that age?
I think at that age, I wanted to actually be a pediatrician. I'm not quite sure why, but I had a wonderful pediatrician at the time. As I got more focused on what I wanted to do in life as I got older, I went on in high school. I became very connected to theater. And that became a central focus of mine in high school, and then of course, well beyond. I know there's some folks perhaps watching this in the Berkshires presently. I spent 4 summers working at the Berkshire Theater Festival in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And then all throughout college, that was also a focal point that I was really focused on becoming an actor right up until the end of college. And then things changed.
So were you going to be a stage actor or a screen actor? Because if it was screen, man, I mean, we're doing it. This is it.
Finally, that's the silver lining in this whole COVID-19 thing for me. I'm finally on screen. I was very focused actually on pursuing the study of theater, and wasn't quite sure where that would lead. But look, every kind of I think we've all experienced this in our lives. Every kind of shift or unanticipated shift leads to other opportunities. In my senior year of college, I auditioned for Yale School of Drama and Tisch and the sort of top 5, whatever they were, theater schools in the country at that time. I was completely out of my league, and it's not surprising that didn't go anywhere. But had it gone had that succeeded, had I arrived at one of these graduate schools for theater, I'm not sure we'd be talking today. And looking back on my life and what has unfolded since I was 21 or 22, I'm thrilled it's gone down this path and not that path. This has been a remarkable. I mean, I think there's only good stuff coming, but I'm so thankful, frankly, that I encountered that roadblock, because it forced me to think about other paths to pursue.
Well, we're thrilled as well, because it's much more wonderful for us to have you as our senior rabbi rather than just perhaps playing our senior rabbi, maybe a Purim spiel or something. So was your college major theater, or?
My college major was something called comparative arts, which was just a way for me to study things that were of interest to me. So I spent a lot of time in college basically studying the humanities. I spent a lot of time in college studying theater, but also literature. French was a focus of mine. I spent my junior year living in Paris. It was a way for me to go deep into things that I cared about. What was complicated, though, I graduated college in 1993, which was a recession. And, there wasn't any, well, first of all, I graduated college with a comparative arts degree. So, it's not like they're professional comparative artists. So I came home, I came back to Boston, and my first job, effectively beyond stuff I had done in the theater, was working at a place called Conran's Habitat, which was sort of like, I'm gathering folks don't know of that here on the West Coast, but it's like a Crate and Barrel that began in London with Sir Conran, and then became a chain of places in the Northeast, and it subsequently went under. But I left before that point. And what happened, that sort of another change, a turn in my path. So I graduated in June. I was hired to teach at Temple Israel in Boston for 4th grade. And I was working at Conran's Habitat. And in December of that year, I was actually in Washington, D.C. for the weekend just for fun. I got a call basically in the middle of the night from the senior rabbi of the congregation and his close partner, Rabbi Rod Friedman. He was in charge of education at the time. And they called me because their youth director had quit. And they asked if I'd take that on. And so I started working full-time in the synagogue, Temple Israel in Boston, in say January of 1994, and that was the beginning of this. I hadn't really pursued a professional path in the Jewish community until that point.
So they plucked you out of what, in my mind, will forever be an animal sanctuary. When I hear Conran's Habitat, I'm envisioning an animal sanctuary. I don't quite know why, but. Wow. So were you very involved in your synagogue growing up, that they even thought to call you? I mean, that.
Sure.
a middle of the night call. They must have really had you targeted for this.
Well, truth be told, and I haven't let Rabbi Ron Friedman forget this, I had interviewed for the job and they turned me down. So they chose this other person, and then they decided when she didn't work out to hire me. But you know, I think if you knew me at that time, if you were an adult in my life at that time and you knew me, you wouldn't have been surprised, perhaps as much as I was, to turn down, you know, to go this route. The synagogue was, you know, in addition to my home, the central institution of my life. And I often think about how I was raised in two homes: my home in Brookline with my parents and brother, and Temple Israel of Boston. And it was really the overlap between those two homes and the people in those two homes that I really credit for effectively creating who I am today. And in fact, you know, in addition to that, what I saw in that home on Longwood Avenue, Temple Israel, it's right near all the hospitals in Fenway Park. What I saw in that home were two individuals in particular who were rabbis, Rabbi Ron Friedman and Bernard Melman. And I think a lot of us find, you know, if you were to ask any of us how we arrived in the jobs in which we are in today, it had a lot to do with seeing other folks do those jobs.
Yeah.
And to my mind, these two individuals were doing something tremendously exciting and honestly much more interesting to me than being an epidemiologist and pursuing a path in academics. And so, you know, I really credit those models who were these guys who were doing this work, and the way in which we were letting each other into our lives. In high school, the three of us became very connected, and those relationships continued to this day. And it was in that matrix, that those intersections, that 2 years later, in 1995, I went off to Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem.
Wow. Wow. I'm just imagining how many people are sitting home now thinking, wow, that was not my childhood experience in my synagogue. And wow, I really hope that my children, that our congregation's children can have that experience and potentially look to you and form this lifelong connection. So that's a really wonderful piece of your history that we get to learn about. Thank you for sharing that with us. So let's keep sharing. Let's find out a little bit about this other home you have, this home you've created with your wonderful wife, Molly. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the two of you met,
Sure.
Where, when, maybe. I mean, I feel like we should know more than just where and when, but I feel like everyone would want to know what your first date was. That seems very important. Just that really get some insight.
Well, you know, just to connect your response to my story about going to, you know, being launched into the rabbinate and how that was centered in the synagogue. I remember, and this connects to how I met Molly. I remember this sort of first week when all of first year HUC students go to Jerusalem, and for the first year of school. And in fact, that was my first year in Israel, my first time visiting Israel. And I remember very clearly standing in a circle with my rabbinical school classmates overlooking the old city. And we were all sharing how we got to this place. And I was the only person in my class who got there through a synagogue. Everyone else came through their camps or through Hillel. And it was in a lot of ways, it was a comment to my mind on sort of the failure of the synagogue to create these new leaders. And yes, that does shape a lot of my thinking about this work. So that was one of the, you know, we keep coming across in my life these fateful turns.
Oh yeah.
Those early weeks there and encountering Jerusalem, that was a new turn. And then something kind of remarkable happened in December of that year. I met Molly. Molly, who had graduated college. She's a couple of years younger than I. She had been working on a dairy farm, a school called the Farm School in Western Massachusetts, a remarkable place. And during the winter, that farm, of course, lay fallow. That's when I learned such an agricultural term. So she came over to Israel to visit one of her roommates from college. and to stay in Jerusalem for approximately a month. And that college roommate's roommate was in my rabbinical school class. And so we had dinner together. I met Molly at a Shabbat dinner through friends. And our first date, or what we consider our first date, was actually a trip to Jordan, to Petra and Wadi Rum and Ammon. And our first date was a weekend-long trip to Jordan, which had recently opened its borders with Israel. And we were sort of the last people in our peer group. We hadn't, neither of us had gone. And so we took a plunge and we went. And we just recently celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary. So that's our first date was there. And, you know, if you don't mind, I just want to say one other piece about this, that,
Please.
you know, I mentioned Israel. I came to Israel as an adult. I came to Israel as a 24-year-old, and all of my connections to Israel began at that point. Molly and I got married in 1999 in June, and I took, that was at the end of my 4th year of rabbinical school, and I took the year off so that she and I could go back to Israel. And I spent that year, Molly and I spent 99-2000 that academic year living in Jerusalem. I was studying at the conservative yeshiva for that year, part-time. And, you know, it was in those 2 years, in 95, 96, and then again in 99, 2000, that I really started understanding my own relationship with Israel, the complexity of Israel, and started really thinking hard about what it meant to be a Zionist in America. And so I see, you know, these were formative years that I think really, the fact that I came to Israel as an adult allowed me to engage with Israel with nuance and complexity, and also with a lot of love. You know, I think before that, a lot of my touches with Israel, I remember something very clearly from my youth from Temple Israel. I don't know if you remember these movies in 78, 77 about the Entebbe raid, the raid on Entebbe. And I remember the Brotherhood showing those films. And I think for many of us, particularly my contemporaries, we had touches with Israel like that. It was a film. It was truly like falafel. There was a simplicity to it that then, as adults or as young adults, we started having it became much more complicated for us. And I'm very thankful that I've had this time in Israel at that point in my life that really helped me create a kind of more complex help me create I guess a foundation for a complex relationship with that country and a complex level of engagement with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel like we need to extend the circle, because you have a wonderful additional ring to your circle, you and Molly, now with Polly.
Oh yeah.
And maybe, yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. them. Right? Ooh,
Them.
yeah.
Yes, we have 2 children who we're fond of, Poppy and Ezekiel. Ezekiel is now 14. Poppy
Did I
is
just say Polly, by the way? Did I say Polly?
I didn't hear you.
Okay, all right. Then
whatever you said.
I'm not gonna fess up. It was
It's
definitely,
okay.
I definitely said Poppy. Definitely.
All right, good. Poppy and Ezekiel, 11 and 14, they're entering 6th and 9th grade. They've been wonderful companions for sure in these last years. I mean, throughout, but you know, we left, in 2016, which was the beginning of the end of my time in Boston, we spent 6 months in Bangkok living together. And that experience, there are a lot of B's in our past. We were in Boston and Brookline, Bangkok. And then in 2017, we moved together to Berkeley. Now this breaks the pattern here in Palo Alto, but nonetheless, they've been tremendous in handling these transitions. And in some ways, this is going to be the most complicated transition because of you know, what will school look like in the fall, particularly with an incoming 6th grader and 9th grader. But I'm also thrilled that we've been able to move them into this community and that there's opportunities for them to become connected somehow, and so, by the way, you guys, I'm speaking to all of you watching, in addition to these two excellent folks who are with me. This congregation has been wonderfully welcoming, and it's made whatever might be complicated or could be complicated so much easier. So I'm also just thrilled to be able to tell you that tonight.
Well, good. We'll be sure to keep that goodwill just going and growing and growing and growing. So tell us just like one or two little tidbits about them to get a sense. So imagining this were a time where people could maybe go places and do things, what might be top of the list for both Poppy and Zeke?
Yeah, Zeke is actually, we brought out this boy, who was born in Boston, like his father, and now he's quickly became a Northern Californian and has taken up skateboarding, and he owns a wetsuit now. And so one of the nice things that he's done within week, days of arriving in Palo Alto is just starting to get on his board and skate around and figure out the neighborhood for himself. So he loves skateboarding. He loves, he's actually very focused on art too. And he and his friend in Berkeley created a company called Dirty Water Customs. And so they have an Instagram and everything. So, he's got that going.
He's also custom boards, is that right?
They like to do different. Okay. Yes, exactly.
Very cool.
He's also into sports, particularly into baseball. And Poppy is an incredible soccer player. During this period of COVID-19, it's been a lifesaver that she's gotten really into karaoke. She's also become a fantastic ping pong player, because that's also something we could do during these months. And what I really appreciate about both of my kids is that they're very good travelers, and they're very good at rolling with things. And I look forward to the day when all of you and they can meet all of you and you can meet them.
Great, fantastic. So I think we just want to hear just a little bit about how the transition's been going, because what a crazy time. And then Bruce, just get ready, Bruce, because you're up. I'm teeing you up. You're in the on deck circle, my friend.
Okay, thanks, David.
The transition's been very smooth, except there's been one irony which kind of points out why I'm in this room. Those of you who are familiar with the campus know that I'm in the conference room. And why I'm in the conference room and not saying hello to you from my house tonight is because of all the problems I could have having moved to Silicon Valley. My internet connection isn't very reliable. I didn't expect that to be a problem. We're working on it, but that's why I'm here. The move has been very, very smooth. However, we haven't unpacked everything, of course, yet. I realized, I think you asked me if I could bring pictures of my family to share.
Yeah.
We haven't unpacked those. However, on the first day of my job, someone gave me this picture of his family. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see?
Oh,
yes. Yes.
Wait, and that's you too, right?
Correct. That's Andy Chang, his wife Abby, and their son Jordan. And this is the only picture of a family that I have in my own home. But why I have this picture, and it's immediately a keeps. I was blown away to be given this by Andy in a socially distanced way. Don't worry.
Did he throw it at you?
Yeah, exactly. It was wrapped. It was, all that stuff. And we all met in Boston, and that's the baby naming for Jordan. And so the fact that we could reconnect during this whole process has meant the world to me. I think also they've aged very well. Jordan has aged the best of all the folks in that picture.
Oh,
that's Boston.
yeah.
That's the sanctuary at Temple Israel. But I've look, that's one of the beauties of this work that I get to do. there's these opportunities for things to connect. I mean, we all have that in our lives, but this connection has felt very special to me. And I also want to underline something that Andy didn't let anyone on the search committee know this story until they were done. So he handled that very professionally and appropriately. But I'm thrilled that I get to reconnect them. I still haven't seen Jordan, in the flesh, but I look forward to that.
Yeah, and maybe holding him in your arms, like
yes,
Andy,
yes.
See if you can do
something like yes, for sure.
That won't be the least bit awkward. I'm sure he's really looking forward to that.
Yes, exactly. He will love that.
All right, Bruce, have at him.
All right, well, it's a tough act to follow, but just continuing the conversation, maybe a little bit more about your past and maybe about some of your thoughts about the future. You've talked about, going to Israel, becoming a rabbi, but can you share a little bit more about why you decided to become a rabbi? I mean, there's lots of different ways to get involved in the Jewish world. There's lots of different ways to get involved in education. What kind of brought you to the calling?
Yeah, I mean, your word calling brings me back again to that circle in Jerusalem. And I think about this because very few of my colleagues use that terminology, as call. I mean, people will utilize that terminology, and my honest response, my really straightforward, I hope you're I'm a fairly honest guy, is this was an opportunity. I saw in this job an opportunity first and foremost to build community and to create the kind of community in which I grew up in. Like many of my colleagues, particularly in the Reform movement, the study of Judaism itself began later. I'm not the product of a yeshiva education. I'm the product of a dyed-in-the-wool classical Reform Jewish family, which I like is remarkable to me. I mean, like, I grew up in that ideology. I grew up in that place. What I didn't grow up with was a real connection to Jewish text or a facility with Jewish text. And it was during rabbinical school that I really started thinking about this. My reasons started to shift. I came in to build community. I came in to create relationships. As I studied Judaism more fully, I realized, no, this is what I should teach, and what is sort of the center point of my work and distinguishes it from other careers, I think, in teaching and learning, is the notion that I can do this teaching in just so many settings across multiple generations, and have the opportunity to be constantly in a process of teaching and learning with the folks with whom I'm in contact. That the frame of teaching and learning is sort of the lens through which I look at all of my work, and that all of these opportunities we have together and when we are with one another is an opportunity for teaching and learning. And it's the way I think about prayer. It's the way I think about social justice. It's the way I think about, I mean, you name it. I think about just my interpersonal relationships. We're teaching and learning one another. And more specifically, I discovered in my late 20s, and that's why I went on to graduate school after rabbinical school, is I love to teach this. I love to teach Torah. I mean, very specifically, I love to teach about the Bible, and that's a center point. And I've glommed onto that literature, perhaps in the way my mother glommed onto English literature. So just as it's just a partial answer almost, Bruce, but
No, it's interesting because you say going from a Reformed Jewish upbringing that was not really tied to text all the way to getting a PhD in biblical studies. Yeah. Kind of going all the way to the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. And also look, why I I think we all kind of seek ways to differentiate ourselves from our parents or our siblings. My focal point was, when I went to get a doctorate, was not about becoming a scholar. I wouldn't call myself a scholar. People are kind to call me a scholar, but I really don't perceive myself as a scholar. I went to graduate school for two principal reasons. The first is, when you finish rabbinical school, you're a generalist. You have a whole range of skills, or you've been exposed to a number of areas, but you might not feel real kind of mastery or ownership about one particular area. And so I decided I should go deep in at least one area. The second reason is, I wanted to become a better teacher and communal organizer. And what I discovered in the process of getting my PhD, I actually, again, like I'm sure they thought they're probably depressed, the folks who gave me my doctorate, but no, they aren't. They were very supportive at Brandeis. It's that I discovered in that process an orientation to teaching that I could stand on. And it gave me very, very directly a framework for me to think about Jewish education more broadly. So I unlike my brother, who's a tremendous academic and a wonderful scholar, I really went at this in order to become a better teacher and leader in the Jewish community.
So speaking of community, and tell me if I have this wrong, I think your first effort as a rabbi going back to Temple Israel was with the Riverway Project, which was a whole new way of building community. Could you talk a little bit more about that idea behind Riverway and kind of where it took you and where you took it?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. Another major turn in my life. I came up with what became the idea that became the Riverway Project. The Riverway is the name of the road that Temple Israel is on in Boston. It's at the corner of the Riverway and Longwood Avenue. It's also an evocative term. I came up with that idea, or what would become that idea, when Molly and I were on our honeymoon in Costa Rica. And I was thinking about other things too, no worries there. But I was also, that was after my fourth year of rabbinical school, and I was starting to think about, well, where would I work and what would I do? And I think one of the guiding kind of insights, and I wasn't the only person to have this insight, the real insight for me at that juncture was, I want to work on building relationships and not work on creating programs. And I was very much aware of my contemporaries. I was in my late 20s at that point. All of my good friends who were Jews, and whether, if they had non-Jewish partners or whatever, none of them were connected to the synagogue, but all of them felt deeply invested in their Jewish identity. And the key idea that's been sort of a guiding principle for me since then, basically since 1999, has been foregrounding relationships as the way to discover what we should do together. So putting people before programs. I was trained in rabbinical school to create innovative programs. What I discovered near the end of rabbinical school is, no, I'm not going to create innovative programs. I'm going to just work on building relationships with people. And so what I proposed, and another piece of this puzzle, Bruce, is that when I first proposed the Riverway Project, what would become the Riverway Project, to folks in Boston at Temple Israel, and that was at the beginning of my fifth year of rabbinical school, I asked for us to create a storefront synagogue, like a satellite in the south end of Boston, where a lot of folks in my age group were living. And they wonderfully shot down that idea because of all of its complexities, things that you both know so well from your work on boards, and the overhead issues and the insurance issues and the costs. And that had me pivot to say, okay, I'm going to start reaching out to unaffiliated Jews living in Boston and asking them what they want to do. And we're going to start meeting in their homes. And we're going to meet in homes all throughout Boston. And we began in the spring of 2001, doing house meetings with unaffiliated Jews and their partners in homes, and saying, I'm a rabbi, I'm going to be a rabbi of Temple Israel. What do you want to build together? And we're going to build it. And beautifully, they, you know, these were folks not willing to cross the threshold into a synagogue. And what they answered so beautifully, because I had committed to doing whatever they wanted to do, right? That was the premise. Thankfully, they said, we want to do prayer, learning, and social justice. And we want the social aspect of this to come out of those really, you know, deep, meaningful things. And so what we did in the Riverway Project is we started building circles of folks living in 5 different neighborhoods in Boston. When I began in 2001, I would say about 90% of my activity was outside of the synagogue. And we were effectively, in my mind, sort of extending the walls of the synagogue. Over time, we moved into this great mix of things happening in the synagogue and outside of the synagogue. And we started redefining what leadership roles look like as well, because my contemporaries weren't interested in the traditional leadership roles in a congregation. And so what's happened over time, I mean, it's a long story, but you know, it's now in its 19th year. It's on its 3rd rabbinic director. And the leadership, folks who came in through the Riverway Project ended up, you know, one of the early folks on this was a recent president of the congregation. And it sort of radically changed how the synagogue evolved itself. And so just one last word on this one, Bruce, forgive me for going a little long in response, is that is my orientation to this synagogue in so many of its aspects. We are going to build relationships and then determine together where we're going to go. That's not in every realm of the place, but it's in many of the realms.
Which is a great segue to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is really based on your Devar Torah just from this past Friday night. If I understood what you were saying correctly, you think that Beth Am, in particular, is well positioned to help confront some of the challenges, not only that our congregation faces, but that a lot of Reform Judaism faces. Can you say a bit more about that? I mean, what do you see those challenges as? Why do you think we're particularly well suited to address them? And that does this touch to some degree on the concept you were just talking about a relational approach?
Sure, I appreciate, first of all, that you even assimilated anything from my Devar Torah on Friday night, and I'm very thankful for the question tied to it. I think for most of us who are connected to this chat tonight, I don't think it's news that American Judaism, I would say for most of the term of my career, so for at least 15 or more years, we've been living through a time of institutional disruption in the terrain of Jewish communal life. And all of the givens that I grew up in, and you and Tina grew up with in terms of synagogue connection and the patterns of synagogue affiliation, all of that I don't think of it. I'm going to say we're in a period of upheaval. That's not bad, but we're in a period of upheaval. And that was even before COVID. So, so when much of my career has been focused on this notion of how will the synagogue evolve itself in response to these major changes in Jewish communal life. Why I was so attracted to Beth Am, and I'm still very attracted to Beth Am, is as I alluded to in my Devar Torah of Friday night, we and Bruce, I think you and I talked about this very early on in our relationship. We living here in the Silicon Valley are living in the center of a new world. And it's a world, like the whole world is now, this is the center point for the entire world in many ways. It's a new world in terms of the centrality of the internet in our lives and what it means to be living as a Jew in this new world is a big question for me. And I will assert it should be our big question as Congregation Beth Am, because by dint of our geography, and also by the fact that all of the folks, so many of the folks who are connected to this congregation are connected to this center point in myriad ways. We are incredibly well positioned to figure out how should the Reformed synagogue evolve itself in this new world. And I want to go a step further. I'd argue we have the responsibility to pursue the answer to that question because of the dint of our, because of where we are and who we are. We are a community of extraordinary resources. I mean that principally in terms of our professional skills. I mean, the skills in this community are astounding, the array of skills. And we have an opportunity to harness those skills in the answer to the central question being, what should the Reformed synagogue be in the next generation? And I think we're very well positioned to answer that question. We also have a responsibility to answer that question because we aren't only into institutional perpetuation solely for ourselves. Like, we aren't doing this just because we need Beth Am to continue itself. A synagogue is a tool for social change, and we need to hold that responsibility, tightly. And so I see this place as a real beacon for innovation and for leadership. And finally, I want to say this. A different way to put this is, what is going to be our Torah? What is the Judaism that we need to teach ourselves and to our children in order to live in this next, moment of Jewish life in this country? We should really think about what is Congregation Beth Am's Torah? And I think we should share that Torah with the rest of the world, because we are we have the capacity to answer that question. And in fact, through answering that question, we'll distinguish ourselves from every other congregation in this country.
I heard you say something earlier that's really stuck with me, and I'm not even sure I can fully articulate it as a question, but I'm going to give it a shot. When talking about relationships, do you see the relationship as the mechanism that transmits Judaism, or to what degree is creating relationship kind of the outcome unto itself? Not that those have to be mutually exclusive, but is there an emphasis on one or the other, perhaps?
So first, it's about foregrounding relationships over programs. It's to recognize, and it directly relates to my role as a rabbinic leader. In an earlier generation of rabbinic leadership, that your expectation as a congregant would have been that I should come with the answers, and that I have the innovative responses to every problem, educationally or what have you. This is to say no, so for me, in terms of a methodology of communal organization, it's to say, this organization is jointly shared. The Reformed synagogue, I would say the synagogue in general, but the Reformed synagogue is ours. Indeed, I'd even go farther. Frankly, Bruce and Tina, it's yours, and I'm your employee. And so my role is first to say, only collectively are we going to come up with the answers to whatever is confronting us. Mm-hmm. And indeed, Tina, it's sort of, I like what you said. Indeed, it's through building these relationships and pursuing this collaboration that effectively we strengthen the congregation and create more buy-in. I'll put it a different way, sort of more, I'll put it in more crass, slightly more crass terms. I often think of membership dues as a kind of bait and switch. If you're going to pay membership dues to a congregation that I'm involved in, basically what you're paying to do is join in the collaboration. And that you pay a dues, and okay, now we can't move forward without asking you and each other the questions of where should we go and why. And so the outcome, the product and the process are completely intertwined. I think that's another way to think of this.
Yeah.
I'll say one more piece. I'm sorry. You've touched on something that's central, the core of who I am.
No,
this is
look,
great.
this is what we want to know.
Any notion of sanctity for me relies on the interpersonal relationship. So if I were to speak about this theologically, and I can, sanctity emerges, the sacred emerges in this interpersonal interaction. So look, one last point on this for now, and luckily we've got months and at least 3 years, that's my first contract here, to keep talking about these ideas and to pursue them. I want to go back to this, to where we are today. Here we are, connected to one another through the internet. And one of my lines from my Devar Torah on Friday was that the internet is our temple. I meant that most in terms of how we function as a congregation. And I also meant it sociologically. The internet is the sort of secular temple for our society. Wherever we come out on the other side of this pandemic, however this unfolds over the next couple of years, we are going to continue our lives in a hybrid model of interpersonal and online. That endpoint was clear even before the pandemic for the American Jewish community and for Reform synagogues. And if anything, the kind of silver lining, I would argue, in this pandemic for us as a community is it's an accelerant in these processes. And so, again, because of who all of you are in watching this, we are well positioned to figure out what will our hybrid life look like as a community, forever after. And as much as we want to be in person, and I can't wait till we return to being in person, it would be a poor decision for us to let go of so many of the creative methods we've started to figure out and experiment with in terms of connecting with one another that have emerged in the last 19 weeks.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about this in various small settings before, but Rabbi Jonathan Sachs several months ago, very early on in the pandemic, said that he really thinks it's incumbent upon us to look for the blessings that we've learned from this moment. And I think this use of technology with the core purpose of creating connection has reminded us of the extraordinary value of connection, and maybe we took it for granted a little bit in our ability to be together in person. So I think all of us are going to be thrilled to hear the focus you place on relationships. So
Great.
I think we need it, now more than ever.
And one of the ways to build relationships and get to know people better, I know, Tina, we were joking at the start of the call about sort of looking at this like a game show and see who's in the other squares. One of my favorite parts of the game shows is always when they get to the lightning round, and the series of rapid fire questions. And if you get them all right, you can win a washer and a dryer.
Here we go. I'm ready. I'm ready. Are you ready?
Tina cooked up some lightning round questions for you.
I can feel the heat. I don't need a washer, but I could use a more solid internet connection. Maybe that could Yes.
Be realistic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Question number one, and this is borrowed for someone who aspired to become an actor. This is perfect for you. Stolen directly from the actor studio. What is your favorite sound?
Well, of course, I love the sound of children's laughter. That's my favorite sound. But look, this is very specific. I love the sound presently of hummingbirds, and I'll explain why. At the beginning of this of COVID, our sheltering in place, I bought a hummingbird feeder for my deck up in Berkeley, and I was like, okay, at least I can see these hummingbirds coming. None came, none. I keep filling it up. No, none came. We moved down here. I put out the hummingbird feeder, and boom, they're coming. So I like that. Boom. I love that sound. Boom.
They're welcoming you. That's
yes,
it.
Exactly.
They're amazing. All right. Let me see the next question. What's your favorite curse word? I'm sorry, that's the wrong list.
Oh.
We'll skip that one. favorite Jewish dessert, babka, rugula, or something else?
Well, I like them both, but if it's rugelach from Marzipan Bakery in Jerusalem, that takes the cake, pun intended.
Is there marzipan in their rugelach? No, okay,
no,
good.
I don't think so, but I'm sure someone will now say, of course there is, or something like that. But yeah, I don't know why it's called that, but yeah, you've had it, I imagine. Delicious. I hope you have. If anyone's coming back from Israel after this all ends, if you're stuck there, bring it home.
That's
going
to be your new favorite sound, like the truck backing
Yeah.
up to your driveway and like dump it. All right, perfect. Your favorite color?
My favorite color is gray. Why? I mean, I love all shades of gray. And I love the Counting Crow song, Mr. Jones. And of course, I love the reference in that song to Dylan. And then there's another reference. There's a Mr. Jones from Talking Heads. But I love all shades of gray, charcoal, heather, steel, iron. And of course, gray is so much better than black and white.
Oh, gosh. Bruce, I feel like you might have like planned for that one. That was
I
really
wore a
good.
gray shirt.
That was, yeah.
Yes.
And this maybe goes back a little bit to something we talked about earlier, but as you sit here today, if you couldn't be a rabbi, what job or profession would you have?
I think I'd be running a school. I think I would have gone into, probably high school teaching, but I'd probably be interested in sort of, look, I'm interested honestly in running the institution. So that might have led to I think I might have ended up sort of creating a school, frankly, and figuring something out in that realm for sixth graders or ninth through 12th graders or something like that.
Oh, congratulations.
Up for a challenge.
Your chance.
Yeah.
You get to do both.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, Sherlock Holmes or James Bond?
That's easy. Bond.
Oh, phew.
Bond.
All right, good.
Yeah. That's the easiest question I've been asked.
Here's another. Now that we know a little bit more about you from earlier, this may answer this question, but Central Park or Champs-Élysées?
Central Park.
You lived in Paris.
I lived in Paris, but anyone who's been in Paris knows the Champs-Élysées is not the best part of town. So, Central Park and we'll always have Paris, but certainly New York is near and dear to me.
Great. All right. Boxers or briefs? Bruce, did you?
Sorry, that was supposed to be edited out of the list.
Never mind.
Never mind.
Go on.
Skip
Sorry.
that one. Next.
All right. Favorite Jewish hero?
Well, look, my true Jewish heroes are people you've never heard of. I mean, they're Jews who I've met in the course of my life that have had a profound impact on me, and they're ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And I'm one of the things I'm thrilled about. I mean, I know I'm about to meet some new heroes in this work. I think if I were to say that, I guess 4 heroes might come to mind. I know you asked for one, but I'm gonna give you 4. If I were to think more broadly or more, in terms of the world of famous Jewish heroes, 3 of them are the Beastie Boys, and the 4th is the notorious RBG. And I love Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I love her rulings. I love her writing. I love her fashion. And I'm inspired by her workouts. So.
Fantastic.
Great role model. All right. With that, I think looking at the time, we're getting close to wrapping things up. I just wanted to remind everybody that we have, like I said, a series of upcoming opportunities to continue a lot of these conversations. I feel like tonight was just an introduction. If it was up to me and Tina, we could go with questions for another 3 or 4 hours based on some of the very thoughtful and provocative responses that you gave us here. But as you said, we'll have a chance to do that in the weeks and months to come. And why we can't all be together just yet, congregation is working to set up a series of these Zoom meetings over July and August for people to get together in smaller groups and really have a more interactive conversation with you. And I know you're really excited about that opportunity as well. So I just wanted to thank Tina for co-hosting tonight, Rabbi Morrison for your time and your thoughtful answers. Want to thank everybody for joining in. And I think it comes with the job, but as senior rabbi, you do get the last word. So let me turn it over to you in case there's any closing remarks you'd like to offer.
First, just to follow up on what Bruce said, we're already planning in this arc of opportunities to get to know one another. Another one of these, I guess, what are we calling them? Fireside chats or something?
Summertime chats or something.
Sometime chats. One of which, probably at the end of August, will I think. I love that. Thank you.
Fireside chat.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting around it like a little history.
I was thinking of bringing my marshmallows. The one of these chats near the end of the summer, I'm hopeful that Andy Chang and I will focus more on some of the strategic initiatives we're thinking about in terms of the larger, broader themes that we've touched upon and that regarding the future of our congregation and where we're going. And so I'm eager for that conversation. I think, and the last word, you've offered me the last word. My last word is just an incredible expression of gratitude. Gratitude for this last hour, gratitude for having this opportunity to see the two of you, Bruce and Tina, and to chat together. And most of all, just gratitude to this community. I feel extraordinarily blessed and privileged to be here. And I want you to know something very directly. This is a complicated way to begin. We've touched on my past. I come with experiences, in various professional settings. Nothing that has happened in my past could have adequately prepared me for starting this job in this way. And I'm thrilled, and I'm very much just moved by the patience and humor with which people have dealt with me as I come up to speed in work in this way. And my colleagues, Rachel Tash and the clergy, the entire administrative staff have done a phenomenal job to ease my entry. And so I thank you for this opportunity to meet with you tonight. And I'm so excited to meet with you all in different ways in the coming months and years.
Thank you so much. Good night, Tina. Good night,
Good night,
Rabbi
Bruce.
Morrison.
Good night.
Good night, Rabbi Morrison.
Take care.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.